I know a lot of people are anxious to hear what you've got to share with us today, David. The world is waiting with bated breath as the rhetoric from the United States and Russia is going back and forth. You've presented this alternative viewpoint. How are you today, David? That's a handsome toque.
Yes, indeed. Since I'm going to be talking about how the Cambridge 5 spy ring might have morphed into the Trudeau 5 spy ring, I thought it appropriate to wear my alma mater's toque. Well, it's my toque, but it's in memory or a commemoration of the, 1209 Cambridge was founded. We produced some great people and some really sinister traitors, including the Cambridge 5. Over to you.
It was an exciting trip, David. You know, now that I've spent the past 2 years, I got to tell you something. I don't know that 2 years have gone by without me getting on an airplane, perhaps since I was in school as a child, because I used to travel a lot. And you and I went to Cambridge. It was really an informative and fun and amazing trip. And that's an authentic hat. You got it right outside the Anchor, which if anybody's near Cambridge, I highly recommend the fish and chips. And you know, David, we're going to be delving into this information in about 30 minutes on our sponsor exclusive segment. People can watch that on subscribestar.com/reversecsi, patreon.com/reversecsi, and subscribestar.com and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. We've been relying on this direct-to-viewer sponsorship method, David, because first of all, it keeps large corporations out of the sponsorship process. So if Huawei or something wanted to come drop $1 million on you, it might be inconvenient to explain how they could be using smart cities to deceive people. And by having the sponsorship come directly from the viewers, people can rest assured that this is information by the people, for the people, and of the people, unadulterated by corporate or government interests. But what is it about these smart cities, David? And what are we going to be talking about in 30 minutes when we transition to Subscribestar and Patreon?
Well, I think your collage today is probably the best example yet of the vital importance, whether you're a commoner, a peasant, or an elite general, or whatever, of getting familiar with the technique of tracking characters to understand narratives, and even more important, to track narratives to understand characters. And in the collage today, we've got two extraordinary people, right? Pierre Trudeau, the late Pierre Trudeau, he died in 2000, former Prime Minister of Canada, and his son, the present Prime Minister. And in the title, we talk about MK Trudeau Program, right? MK standing for MK Ultra, Trudeau, and
mind control. Right, MK?
Yes, mind control, right. So when did the concept of mind control begin? Where it was developed? Where did it get perfected? And has it been harnessed today against the interests of the Five Eyes intelligence network? Well, the answer is yes, and we're looking at it because Pierre Trudeau went to Moscow in 1952 as leader of the Canadian Communist Party delegation to an economic conference. But in 1951, Moscow had two very important residents who, in my opinion, were the leaders of the Cambridge 5 spy ring, probably the most damaging spy network in history as far as the Five Eyes intelligence network are concerned, because they completely burrowed into particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, and then later Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. And these two, I mean, why wouldn't these two groups, that is to say, Pierre Trudeau, the leader of the Communist Party delegation of Canada at this conference, and Guy Burgess and Donald Maclean, have met where the one could have briefed the other, or should have briefed the other, or in my opinion, did brief the other. Here's how you set up a spy network inside the Five Eyes, right? Now, he's a quick learn, is Pierre Trudeau. He comes back, and then we start seeing, I believe, the emergence of a concept which I think is a technique of infiltrating highly technically sophisticated cities with spy networks that are resilient to investigation by the legitimate intelligence agencies of the country where they find themselves. And I believe the first one to take off in any meaningful sense, in the modern sense, was London under the Cray twins. which, just to remind people, these were the gang bosses basically operating pedophile entrapment and blackmail networks. They were jailed in '69 for murder for life. And then they operated a protection racket from behind bars, which I think converted London into a smart city where they use criminal gangs in the street and in the prison for counterintelligence or subversion. Right? So now in 1980, Pierre Trudeau appears to have started or taken Canada into this model of tracking the good guys, right, and handing them over to the bad guys, right, in 1980, where the criminal intelligence network associated with what would become the Family Maintenance Enforcement Program in Vancouver was able to track people and abort any kind of intelligence or surveillance against the invaders or the external forces like China and Russia. So this program, Family Maintenance Enforcement Program, and here I appeal to the people who study Orwell a bit, because my understanding of Family Maintenance Enforcement Program, through experiencing it, it should better be called the Family Manipulation and Extortion Program. Because what it's empowered to do is to take money from one side of a family and give it to the other without any transparency or audit trail, and basically alienate mothers and fathers and children to the point where the children can be handed off into an international pedophile ring. So back to Trudeau. Pierre Trudeau, I believe, sent his son, Justin Trudeau, from McGill University in 1994-95 to UBC in 96-98, where UBC at that time, this is 96-98, had embarked on a basically a very well-funded program to develop what appears to be mind-controlled plasmas, where the idea was that at the laboratory run by Dr. Peter Cullis up there, he had discovered or had patented or was refining a method of taking what Bill Gates would call a COVID plasma, which is a plasma derived from someone who's convalescing from a disease, and injecting it into someone else on the basis that it has antigens and antibodies that would allow the people otherwise not infected some kind of protection. Now, this is a very hazardous procedure, and I believe WHO or the CDC Defense Center has actually advised against. But Bill Gates, and one can Google it, was apparently a great promoter or sponsor of the use of COVID plasma. And what I believe
where do
that
we
they
see that?
well, just Google COVID plasma, convalescence, and Bill Gates, and you'll find that it's a treatment or a potential treatment for a future infection.
But
It
I thought
appears
he
to
doesn't
be-
like it because he only wants the vaccine. Well, here it is.
Oh, there you go. A potential plasma treatment for COVID-19, a conversation with Dr. Tony Hoover. And within that article, you'll see, I believe, there you go, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So whether that's sponsored or endorsed by, it would seem the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation had...
Oh, look what it says. Oh, I thought it
Yeah.
said blood. It says bold. Sorry.
Okay. So now up at UBC, between 1980, when that research started under Peter Cullis, to the present time, they have developed a method called mRNA, messenger RNA delivery of arbitrary large molecules using lipid nanoparticles. And lipid nanoparticles break down inside the brain cells into ionized particles that are now susceptible to external beam radiation or electromagnetic field. That is to say, they can be disturbed remotely by a beam of energy, and I'm going to come to a quote from Putin in a minute. That is to say, the effect of those ionized particles can be to plug, distort, or basically perturb what are known as the voltage-gated calcium cells that send signals to the heart and the lungs. So this is an extremely powerful potential binary biological weapon, because you can put a large molecule into the brain that shouldn't be there and combine it with external beam radiation to produce a certain desired effect, which was discussed extensively as an extension from the idea of rage and hallucinations induced by LSD to rage and hallucinations, and what I've introduced, the concept of obedience and consent.
But David, let's explain to people what this idea of a binary weapon is, because I think there are certain terms that maybe people aren't immediately familiar with. It is if I understand correctly, it is a weapon that consists of two components that are inert on their own, but when they are combined together, they do something. It's almost like when you buy that kind of like epoxy resin that comes in a thing where there's two tubes, and they can leave it in the store for months and months while you're waiting to buy it. Here it is, JB Weld. But then when you take this tube and mix it with this tube, you get something that in 30 seconds becomes incredibly strong, super crazy glue. So this is a binary adhesive. You're talking about a binary weapon. So like one of these tubes could contain something that if you eat it, does nothing, but it just stays in your body. And then if somebody introduces the second tube, you die.
Absolutely. You've nailed it, right? This is really exciting, because whilst Putin is casting around for the possibility that the US has bioweapons laboratories in Ukraine, I've done a tracking, a mental tracking procedure using my ground truthing techniques, and said there's actually a far more effective way of distributing binary weapons in a target country, such as China with Wuhan City, or New York, or in the Ukraine, and that is through this Trudeau program. Because the Trudeau program essentially, by 1949, after the foundations of SOS Children's Villages, it appears that Pierre Trudeau, through a network of appointments in Canada, particularly of governor generals, the governor generals appointed by Trudeau became patrons of SOS Children's Villages, right? And there is an SOS Children's Villages in Surrey, which is just up the road from where I live. But the intriguing thing about SOS Children's Villages, it has 550 villages around the world in 130 countries, with 78 medical centers providing immunology, serology, and hematology services to the local community. China, I believe, has 12 or 14 SOS Children's Villages. Ukraine has a couple. I don't know the total number in Russia, but my point is, if you are providing hematology, immunology, and serology services to the local community, you could be stockpiling biological weapons.
Well, let's address that for a second, David, because this is what Putin has been saying, and the United States has been denying that. There are some interesting headlines associated with this. We had Joe Biden or somebody said that the United States was going to stop gaslighting, which is like, what are they doing using terms like gaslighting, false flag? That used to be stuff that got you kicked off of YouTube. But the Washington Post reports 7 a.m. this morning that the UN Security Council is to meet at Moscow's request over unproven claim of U.S. biolabs. Why not just call it a claim? This is the claim. We haven't had an opportunity to prove or disprove. The fact that he's calling this meeting, conceivably he'll present evidence and then we can prove it or disprove it. This is a real demonstration of bias on the part of the Washington Post. But here he's saying, you're telling us, Victoria Nuland, that these are just medical facilities. But if they are, why not admit it and allow the UN or some mutually agreed upon group to go investigate the thing? They're just lying about it.
Yeah, and I think that this is a decoy, basically, because they can't prove, and I don't believe they will be able to prove, that the US has biolabs in Ukraine. that could threaten Russia.
What do you mean?
Because I think
why can't they prove that? Of course they
well,
can.
because unless you go there, I mean, now they're going to be faced with US denial. Sorry?
Russia is there. They have captured these
Yes.
things.
Oh, they captured them? Where are the photographs? Where's the images? Where's the evidence that they've actually got
Well,
it?
they've blocked RT everywhere. Let's see if we can see it. I mean, that's the thing. It's a valid question, David, but you know, the United States is not saying, all right, here's RT, here's Russia's allegation, here's their evidence. They're just saying you can't have RT, you can't have Ukraine on Fire. The documentary was pulled off of YouTube. They're burning the books and they're spoliating the evidence when Putin is saying, let's look at the evidence, and they're not allowing him to do it.
And who is notorious for the spoliation of evidence, particularly with crimes related to the possibility that Vancouver became a smart city controlled by organized crime, is that we have the raid on Starnet. All right.
Right.
When the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But my point is the distribution network, the supply chain for vaccines and viruses is far more likely to be run through SOS Children's Villages, which has medical centers in all of the countries where these outbreaks of COVID or some mutant of COVID-19 have occurred, like Peru and Johannesburg in South Africa, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to look at what is the mechanism by which COVID plasmas might be transported from the place where they're developed, which would appear to be the University of British Columbia, from the lab there of Dr. Peter Cullis, who has, with the university, a number of patents which are being used by Moderna and Pfizer to distribute these technologies, right? So where are they going to? Because what precedes the outbreak in, for example, Johannesburg of Omicron, or in Peru of the Delta virus? And what I'm saying is you've already got a mechanism, or Trudeau has a mechanism for distribution, which is SOS Children's Villages in the 550 villages and the 78 medical centers in 135 countries. They have the ability to deliver, under the guise of hematology, immunology, and serology services, a biological weapon. Let me come back to the binary part. If, as I believe, Dr. Peter Cullis, under this FMEP program in Vancouver, has managed to develop a binary weapon which comprises two parts, as you point out. One part, which is the large molecule that is delivered into the brain cells, right, to trigger the antigens and the antibodies. And the other part, which is the plasma or activated electrical EMF or radio waves that turn on a device that produces a certain mental effect on the brain, including the inability to distinguish between truth and reality, right? That's what we're looking at with these kind of news stories, what you just suggested. The public is totally confused now. Are there bioweapons labs there? But the idea of having Sorry.
Let me just interject, David. I think that it could have more to do. You see, we may slightly differ on this. I do enjoy exploring the hypothetical possibilities, and certainly that exercise has so many times raised evidence and caused us to explore things that we otherwise might not. So if that's the only thing we do with it, it's worthwhile. But you asked about evidence, and I agree the public has been greatly confused. This is evidence that was developed by a Russian journalist, or perhaps, I can't read it in Russian, so I don't know, but it's pictures of Obama at a facility. I'm going to attempt to translate this with Google Translate or something, but there are some documents in English here that are, talking about commitments of Ukrainian facilities to transfer dangerous pathogens to the Department of Defense. I don't know if you saw that. Here, right here. So this is Article 3. Total cost of the U.S. Department of Defense of all material, training, and services provided pursuant to the agreement and associated expenses shall be up to $15 million. Ministry of Health of Ukraine, not limited to a cooperative biological research, biological threat agent detection. And then this here is saying that biological threats, the Ministry of Health of Ukraine shall transfer to the U.S. Department of Defense requested copies of dangerous pathogen strains collected in Ukraine for cooperative biological research in the centralized laboratories of Ukraine. So you could say you are collecting dangerous pathogens to create viruses, but it's like getting on the subway with a screwdriver. I could say I'm going uptown to tighten a screw and fix something, or I could stab somebody in the throat with it. It's the same screwdriver, but is it a weapon or a tool?
Now, this is very important. You see, that research is done under, I believe, what is called the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, right, of the United States, which was put in place to try and take weapon stockpiles that were perhaps dangerous and might fall into enemy hand and bring them, in some cases, to research facilities like Northwestern University to see if they could come up with a detoxification procedure. Remember Northwestern University, we got Bernardine Dawn squatting around there. Now, you remember the Novichok story where I did the research? Yes. And I Googled for patents, and there is a patent taken out by Northwestern University for the detoxification of certain pathogens, including Novichok. Well, to test that, you need you need Novichok in the stockpile to see if your detoxification works, right?
Well, not only to test it, I think to make it, you would need.
Well, exactly. Or you bring it in, but then you can send it and try and set up Russia with a Novichok attack in Salisbury. Remember when we were in the UK, we were thinking of going via Salisbury, but we ran out of time. But that's where the Novichok attack appears to have taken place, and it was imputed to Russia. Again, this typical technique, I believe, of setting someone up or framing them as though they were guilty of it. Russia said, we don't have stocks, or we handed it all over. But America collected those stocks, took them to Northwestern University, and evidently someone put the Novichok in a Nina Ricci perfume bottle.
Not only that, right? David, since you made that revelation, there's an article here, interesting how it seems to be being blocked, but I think TASS is the Russian, NPR, and so that's not opening, but it says Russia proves Novichok agent patented in the U.S. Maybe now it's going to come up. Let's see what it says. Maybe they watch the show, David. It's so slow.
Well, they should, because we're further advanced than any, I believe, intelligence agency, because now when that Novichok was put in the Nina Ricci bottle, right, that was found by a dumpster diver, right? I forget the man's name. He was the boyfriend of the woman who actually died, right? But my point is, the way that was structured was it was a Russian attack, right?
They still say that. When they say Putin's a killer and he kills his enemies, that's what they're talking about. The poisoning of these different people that you have provided evidence was not Russia.
Exactly. And more particularly that links back to Chicago, Northwestern University, where the cluster of SOS Children's Villages in the United States is operated out of Chicago, right? So my point again is, I believe the principal and most sophisticated director of technology for SOS Children's Villages worldwide is this Trudeau Foundation, right? Mm-hmm. The Trudeau program, because there you have the ability for Trudeau. He goes to UBC in 96 and 98. His flatmate or his roommate is convicted ultimately in 2010 of directing an international pedophile ring. The chief executive officer of SOS Children's Villages admits to serial abuse of children, stretching back to the... Go ahead.
Google is blocking that TASS website. I was able to get to it using Apple Safari. So here it is. TASS says Russia proves Novichok agent patented in U.S. as a chemical weapon. According to the Russian diplomat, nerve agents like Novichok were not only produced, but were even patented as a chemical weapon in the United States. The Hague,
now, do they give the number of the patent? But they do. You can Google it, and I think we've looked at it previously.
I was trying to do that.
Yeah, the detoxification patent published by Northwestern University in Chicago, right, which is the cluster of SOS Children's Villages. The SOS Children's Villages has the facility to stockpile binary weapons. And just coming back to your binary point, because it's vitally important for our purposes, The binary weapon, in my allegation, is it's got a molecular component that is delivered into brain cells to produce a particular reaction, like rage and hallucinations in the case of LSD, but it can be an arbitrary large molecule. But what they've done up at UBC, I believe sponsored by Trudeau and this program, is they created a binary weapon, because after delivering the large molecule into the brain cells, what is left are ionized particles inside the brain cells that can be activated by 5G. So when we're looking at the news or the possibility that Huawei is engaged in 5G activation of these kind of infections, back in 2014 or 15, we find Huawei in a 5G innovation center with the BBC research at the University of Surrey.
All right, David, hang on one second, because we're just about out of time, and I've been pressing the limits here so that we could present this. The U.S. patent for a metal organic framework for the catalytic detoxification of chemical warfare nerve agents, Northwestern University. That's interesting. This is not the patent that Russia is talking about.
Well, it may be.
Here it is,
the
though.
Russians may be confused, but there you have Novichok.
No, they may have other patents. The point is there's a lot of patents in the U.S. on this.
Yes, but it would be useful if the Russians published the patent number, because coming back...
We got a break here, David, because we've got to go over to our sponsor exclusive segment. I'm sorry to stop you, and people say, let David talk. But this is a show, and I direct it. So sometimes David needs to stop, and we go to the next segment, and people are going to be able to join us on that in less than 3 minutes. I've got to hurry here. Please visit subscribestar.com/reversecsi or patreon.com/reversecsi. You can sponsor David at either one of those sites. And we wouldn't have access to David's genius and his insight, all his patent information, and his unique way of skinning a cat, whatever you want to call it. So join David on Subscribestar or Patreon/ReverseCSI. And of course, you can support Crowdsource the Truth at subscribestar.com or patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. We'll be back in 2.5 minutes. So join us over there. We're going to go into a lot more detail than we're able to do on YouTube. Absolutely worth it. We'll see everybody in